Good afternoon, Miami. David Winker here. I am so happy to be here with Sherri Peacock to my left and Jen Howard.
Hello, David.
And I'm calling this the Save the Playhouse show.
Yay.
We're going to have a number of other guests come in, but I'd like to introduce yourself. Sherri, would you tell us why you're here and why you're passionate about the Playhouse?
Well, I would like to say that I'm very happy to be here because I grew up in Miami. I don't live here anymore, but it still is home. It always feels like home. And my attachment to the Playhouse is because I grew up here, but it goes further than that. My family, for a number of generations, has been in the Grove and very active in the Grove. My name is Sherri Peacock, and the Peacocks were one of the founding families of the area.
That's awesome. And Jen?
Well, I was born and raised in Miami, and I have an architectural background. My family has always had a business in the Grove. We've lived there, worked there. And I started to get more involved when I used to drive down Grand Avenue and started to see the historic Bahamian houses being demolished. So I got involved with the Coconut Grove Collaborative. And then later I met Max and started working with the Save the Playhouse.
And just for the audience, we're gonna switch out a couple guests, and we have coming up next, we have Max Pearl, Andy Parrish, and Carmen Pelaez are going to come in at different points to talk about different aspects of that. Before I jump in, I'd like to start with kind of a broad question. You came here this past week visiting from Paris.
Yes.
And I have often felt, we try to go to Europe. My sister lives in England, and we try to go to Europe every summer. And there seems to be a little bit of an attitude toward a blasé attitude toward historic preservation in Miami, because we go to Europe for our history.
Well, I think that's partly why it's important to save the Playhouse, is that there aren't so many buildings that carry a story with them. And the Playhouse not only carries an architectural story, it carries another story, which is the story of the theater, the story of its life, which adds a lot to the neighborhood.
I love that description. I got to tell you something. And Jen, for me personally, I moved here in 1996, and I went, back then I was a single guy. I was dating, and I would go to, I remember going to the theater. I have fond memories of walking into that theater. How do we translate to somebody, the next generation who didn't get it? I mean, that thing has been closed for so long. Mm-hmm. How do you translate, why should the next generation, or why should people that are younger than us care about saving the Playhouse?
Well, several reasons. One is the cultural aspect. We need more than our iPhones and our games and shopping. And we need to bring some of these things back to our children, so they can go see a play, so they know what Broadway is, so they know about culture and things that matter, and history, historical buildings and the arts in our neighborhood. So that's why I think this building is important. It's one of the places that matter, and it's and the places that matter are the backbone and the heart and soul of the city. And I think it's important to start saving these in our city, because we're starting to lose them left and right.
I think it's interesting for me because, when you talk about, what got us here, we have this theater that's been empty since, fact checkers, Max Pearl, 2006. So we're coming up on almost 20 years of a building just empty. And there's a lot of reasons for why we're there. And I'm going to bring Andy in to talk about some of the history. But what's the path forward? Can we talk about, if we, oftentimes as a lawyer, I'll try to start a conversation of saying, if this could move forward in any direction, if you were the dictator of Miami, what would this do? Can you give us some insight, Sherri? What's the path forward in your mind?
Well, I don't know. I hope this is going to answer that particular question, but you started by saying when you went to the Coconut Grove Playhouse, you had a certain feeling when you walked in that place. That's what happens when you go to the theater. When you walk into a theater, from the very beginning, from the very start, you have a certain feeling. And that's really important, and it cannot be felt in a lot of other places. It's very particular to being in a theater and seeing or hearing live performance art. So I think that preserving or getting that feeling back, offering people that in the Grove, in Coconut Grove. I think that's what's important.
And how do we do that, Sherri? What is this needs? What are your thoughts on the design? What's the path forward? We've got a hulking building that's just rotting. There seems to be complete political stalemate.
Well, I can't answer you about the politics of it because I don't live here and I don't understand them. I can say that the reason I'm here and the reason I got involved was by looking at the plans that are proposed. I feel pretty strongly that the plans that are proposed with a facade and a break between the facade and the theater, I think that you will lose to a certain extent that feeling that you were talking about when you went into the Grove Playhouse in 1996.
And tell me about that one of the contentious issues is the size, that we have to reduce the size.
Okay. Well, I didn't tell you about my performing arts career. So I've spent a lot of time in theaters. And I understand that with different venues, different sizes, I was a dancer. I was not an actress. But with a different size theater, certain pieces, certain ballets, certain plays are appropriate. So if you're talking about the history of the Coconut Grove Playhouse and you reduce the size of the theater to 300 seats, you are going to reduce the kinds of work that can be performed there. So it will not correspond to what it was before. So that's a big change. I know you live in Paris now, but I guess one of the things I struggle with is, and we talked about this earlier, is the idea of like, I don't understand why a 700 seat theater is not financially viable. Is there a movement that we need smaller theaters in general? Is it true worldwide that there's no need for seven? Like, where is this coming from? Well, I'm not a businesswoman, so I can't give you the economics behind that. I would tend to say that selling a lot of seats is probably a good thing. But
I know less about theater and more about business, but I'm with you. It seems like it'd be better to sell 700 tickets than 300 tickets.
And we did. We used to sell out, right? A lot of tickets.
Right.
And the theater really helped the economic impact of it.
So tell me, Jen, why are we talking about reducing the size? Where's this coming from?
Well, I think the county has alternative motives here. And, clearly, if we are trying to help the Grove and create and save a beautiful historic place, you save the place. You don't bulldoze it down and put them all in. And they keep saying they're not. But if you look at their plans, it's pretty much, if you only have 300 seats and you look at that building and it had 700 seats, what's going on with the rest of it, right? So
we're going to jam it full of parking and retail.
The parking is still going in the parking lot. So it's not like that building is becoming a parking lot. It's, it's going to be retail. It's going to be other things. And then when the 300 seat theater fails, then it's also going to become retail. And so we don't need any more retail in the Grove.
Jen, I'm going to bring in Andy. Is there anything else that you want to, any other insight you have as to the path forward? I'm kind of going to ask you the same question.
I want to read my prelude that I wrote.
Read it.
This. I've been nagging you and Grant, as you know, for a while about doing a series on why saving historic places matter, because we always get, told that we're like the granola tree hugging people that are just trying to save something that's not worth saving. And, it's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that, we need these places. Saving one historic place saves the city. And then we keep going on and on and on. So I'm going to read this little thing and then I'm going to go. Historic preservation is not the enemy of growth and development. Rather, it's the idea that the unique identity of place resides in the acknowledgement and preservation of its outstanding examples of the art and architecture of our cities. Our buildings are the documents of our past and our cultural heritage. They can define a place with symbolic meaning and engender the connection to a society, to a neighborhood. Modern preservation and conservation is the antidote to society's obsession with consumption and the mall.
I love it.
Thank you.
I love it. I think it's interesting. All right, I'm going to kick you out.
Okay.
I'm going to bring Andy in.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm going to put Andy I'm going to put Andy on the hot seat.
Yeah.
So Andy Parrish needs no introduction, has been on the show before, does not fit in that chair.
So right.
Too tall. And we've talked a lot about history, and the way that I always introduced Andy is I saw him at a City of Miami Commission meeting, and he was acknowledged by the commissioners, and I can't remember if it was Joe Carollo or Manolo, but they said, that's Andy Parrish. That's one of the good guys. That's one of the good developers. West Grove developer. And I think I always find your perspective interesting because you're not Granoli. You're a developer.
With a small d. I do small projects. I've built affordable housing in the West Grove for first-time home buyers who all lived in the Grove beforehand. That's when I started doing that in the 90s. And then we built the Grand Island building, and where the Arts for Learning is, the Caribbean commercial building. We've always tried to do the same architecture, vernacular architecture that could be found in the islands. And we've always kept it low scale and to fit in the community. And there was actually a charrette in 2002 that planned that for all the way down Grand Avenue to be 3-story buildings, perfectly sized for the Coconut Grove. And now, of course, people are even talking up to 8-story buildings on a street that's only 75 feet wide. So it's just out of control, the development interest.
And with that, I'm going to put you on the hot seat because yesterday I was in front of the commission on the Charles Avenue, the commercialization, turning some residential lots into a hotel. And he had I think, a very fair question. I'm going to put to you the question he said to me, which was, we're already developing. The cat's out of the bag. And he seemed to imply like there's not much to save. Like he basically was saying, we should have 20 years ago done something in the West Grove to stop what's happening. But there doesn't seem the political appetite now to say, let's fix it now. This is a fixable problem, so let's stop it now. How do we respond to that? How do we respond to the idea of it's too late?
I think you said it best. It's if 20 years ago would have been better, it's not what you can do now is what you can do. And there's still a lot in the West Grove, Village West Island District, as they call it, that is very preservable. There's still maybe not the same number of African-American residents, original residents that were there 20 years ago. There certainly are not, probably less than half. But that's their home, and it's worth keeping. There's lots of vernacular architecture still left, but it is disappearing.
And so I want to talk. Sherri was saying earlier, she's not a business person. She comes from an arts background. You are a business person, and one of the things I struggle with all of this is I knew a functioning playhouse. And I saw, hundreds of people going to the Playhouse, for 3 shows a weekend, 4 shows, I guess Thursday night, 4 shows a weekend, hitting the restaurants, the bars. You'd go out, you'd go have dinner before, you'd go out for dessert and coffee afterwards. Am I off that this could be an economic driver for the Grove?
It depends on how it's done and how it's managed and how the city enforces its own rules and regulations so as to not compound the disenfranchisement of the West Grove, which is its immediate neighbor. Right behind the Playhouse is, in fact, the Playhouse used to be separated from the West Grove with a barbed wire fence. So even though the land came from Mr. Stirrup, donated the land, it was built by Bahamians, the Playhouse was. So there's a lot of damage to be repaired, and it needs to start now. And one of the things that the new Playhouse plan is in our plan, not the one the county has, is to really reach out to the West Grove community and make a cultural resource for their children, not separated by any barbed wire fence, but welcomed so that they can experience the cultural connection that your previous 2 guests were talking about. They deserve it. They built Miami. It's the oldest. Charles Avenue, Evangelist Street, as it used to be called, is the oldest historic street in the city of Miami. To trash it would be a disgrace for the city.
And tell me, Andy, from a historic, one of the things I've found through some of my work in the West Grove is, my understanding is that Charles Ave, previously Evangelist Street, Evangelist Avenue, is the only. The street is historically preserved.
It is.
It's the only street.
It's in the Miami City Code.
Yeah,
it's got a special zoning district, which the city has almost consistently ignored.
Yeah,
with its own code.
So tell me, you brought a piece of paper. I know Andy. You're waving this paper around. Talk to us.
All right. I was the chair of the Historic and Environmental Board in October of 2005, 16 years ago, going on 17. And a lot of this controversy should never have happened. And I have to take full responsibility for that, and I'll tell you why. First, I want to read the county, in their plan to demolish most of the building and replace it with a shopping mall, has said only the facade of the Playhouse was designated and is worth preserving. They've since backed off a little bit because we've caught them in that lie. But I just want to read from page 5 of the transcript, which I have, of that meeting that I chaired 16 years ago. And this is Ellen Aguccione, who was the consultant who made up the designation report. I just read one paragraph of it. Ellen says, I also was a bit chagrined at myself because at the end of the report, I made the statement only the south and east facades are distinctive, which has led, I think, to people assuming that I am saying that only the east and south facades are important, and therefore we don't need to worry about the building envelope itself. I want to make clear that my intent, why I wrote that, again, I'm not sure why I wrote that, but my intent was certainly to include the entire building in the historic designation report. We don't just do the envelope or what's seen from the front. It doesn't receive its significance from just being 2 walls. It's an entire history of what happens inside the building, which is exactly what you'd said earlier. So the county has taken this one sentence that only the south and east facades are worth saving, and they have parlayed that for the last 2 decades into saying that if they save just the front that you're looking at right there, the rest can be demolished.
So I have a couple of reactions to that. First of all, Andy bringing the receipts. I love that, you've led the charge on that. And I think that we've changed the narrative of the county has been very aggressive of this is the case. We only have to preserve the front. That was never the facts. And I think we've turned the tide on that. Sherri, one of the things that we've talked about, you and I have talked about, is by preserving the front, they seem to be setting up a situation with a breezeway. Tell me about the architectural.
Well, I will talk about the breezeway, but I want to follow up on this idea of the whole theater as an entity. When you work in theater, when you rehearse in a theater, when you're performing in a theater, when you go to the theater, there is a term that is used to designate the house. The house is not the part of the stage behind the proscenium, but the house is where the people who come in sit, where they go get a drink. That's the house. The house is very important. If you take the house away from a theater, it doesn't exist anymore. The house defines the space, it defines the ambience, it defines the energy, and it also defines the relationship between the performers and the audience. Without an audience, there's no reason to be there. So I think that when we're talking about a theater, we have to talk about the house too. And which brings me to your question about the breezeway. The first thing, when I first saw these plans, I really wanted to love them. I really did. I really wanted the Playhouse to open as soon as possible. And I actually went pretty far to look at the floor plans. And the first thing that I saw was that breezeway, the facade, and then a breezeway. What happens when you go to the theater? You mentioned at the beginning of this talk, I went to the theater, this is how I felt. It's really important as a theater goer, the 15 minutes that lead up to the performance, the walking through the door, where are we going to go? Where's the orchestra? Where are we sitting? Are we on the right? Are we on the left? What's going to happen with the breezeway is that energy will be broken completely. And I don't live here anymore, but I really have recollection that it rains a lot in Miami at certain parts of the year. It's, I wouldn't want to get dressed up to go out to the theater and then walk through the front door. I'm not sure where the tickets would be given or whatever, and then go outside again. That doesn't make sense to me.
So I'm going to kick you two out.
Well, I have
Oh,
to add
please,
one thing
please.
really quickly, because I said in the beginning, this whole controversy, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this is I could have nipped this in the bud in 2005 as a chair. If at the next meeting of the HEP board, I turned to the city staff and said, did you change the designation report? Because our board, and it's in the transcript, unanimously voted to designate the whole Playhouse. And I didn't do that. So the only thing that survives other than this transcript from that meeting is the designation report, which the county has used for the last
But
20
I would
years.
say that some of our hard work has paid off because recently the District Court of Appeals did recognize as part of the mayoral veto, which is a continued battle. But the court has now recognized. They kind of scolded the county for that position, saying that is, rejecting that argument in the decision. They're like, that's not what even the report says.
Yeah.
Like we were able to insert as interveners this information, and the court, I think reading the designation report in the context of what was written, it's like, no, that's not true. That's not what was designated.
I will depart for let Max come in.
Yes, please.
But before I do that, also, you made one mistake, one misstatement. The Playhouse is not deteriorating beyond repair. You seem to imply that it's on its last legs. It's not, and Max can talk to that.
Bring him in. Let's go.
Talk to that. So it's in good shape.
Max, I'm bringing in Max Pearl. Thank you. I'm bringing in Max and Carmen. Carmen, come on, sit down. Hand me that. That's your windscreen. I'm going to put it on for you. Come on in, Max.
Okay. Thank you for having us.
Carmen, Max, you guys need no introduction.
Oh, maybe you do.
I'm going to come to you in a second, Carmen, because I know you got a lot to say.
Yes, I'm chomping at the bit, as usual. Give a Cuban something to be passionate about, and you're going to have a hard time shutting her up.
I have to tell you that some of my greatest conversations are with you. I love calling you on any issue, and we can agree, disagree. Doesn't matter.
Same.
Max,
Same.
how are you doing?
David, I'm glad to be out of the COVID experience, and we can exchange our facial masks for the comedy and drama masks.
Love it.
So
Max,
really excited. We need no introduction, but we said that out the past, and everybody's forgotten about it too. So maybe we do need an introduction. So,
well, here's what I have to ask you, Max. This idea of, I think some people, when you drive by that building,
right.
Tell me put that on the ground.
Sure.
Who is that giant bottle of water you have? Tell me.
Need it. I'm dehydrated.
What is happening with the building? We drive by it. It's just sitting there.
Well, where should I start? What's not happening with the building is it's not on the verge of collapse, as this false narrative that's being presented will have the public believe. And the majority of the public, I would say, believes. I mean, we hear it all the time. I operate a blog with over 12,000 followers since 2009. And the most, I'd say, if I had to gauge which comment we hear, most common fear from the public is, number one, we can't stop it from crumbling. We have to stop it from crumbling. It's going to collapse. There was a structural engineer who in recent years, under the Architectonica oversight, did a report. They said, Andy, am I correct? They found nothing structurally unsound or in danger of falling apart with that building. It was built 1926 during one of the worst hurricanes, Labor Day weekend hurricane of all time. And it's been through many hurricanes since then without falling down, in spite of the fact that the county didn't bother to put up any shutters, sandbags, didn't bother to put up a tarp on the leaky roof, which we know for a fact. We have aerial photography from Hammer Roofing that show the terrible evidence of leaking that's taking place, bringing mold into the theater. So
I think that's the theater's own revenge, right?
Yes.
You want me to fall apart by neglect, but I was built solid. So even though
Love
they
that.
haven't put up tarps, they have through all the hurricanes, it's still like bring it.
Yeah.
Bring it.
You know,
That
I think
about
that's
sums it up.
fantastic.
So tell me this. So what I want to get down to kind of with you guys is, so first of all, I'm going to ask both of you the same question I've asked. Carmen, you are appointed the dictator of arts in Miami-Dade County.
She is.
What's the path forward with the Playhouse?
Well, hardly a dictator. Listen, I think.
No, I'm saying, but I am appointing you now.
Oh, you're appointing me.
What's the solution?
The solution is as clear as the nose on our face. There's a vision. There's a practical vision to enact, right? Listen, Miami pre-Basel and Miami post-Basel went from being, you know, a good city that had some interesting things to a capital of art, of visual art. We had the history before Basel. Coconut Grove Playhouse was the only part of our city that offered real cultural relevance to our city and to the rest of the United States. If you look at the performers, the playwrights that have worked at Coconut Grove Playhouse, that stands up to any theater.
One of the books that Max brought in was Broadway by the Bay.
Yeah. It's
30 years of the Playhouse. It's got all the playbills going through.
It stands up against any theater in the country, right? When I was a working actor in New York, the fact that my play had been performed at the Playhouse
mattered.
Always. They'd look at my CV and go, oh, you were at Coconut Grove Playhouse? It was a known quantity, right? The Grove has so many shuttered retail and restaurant spots. It has 2 malls, half of them are empty.
We're on our third or fourth iteration of Cocoa.
Exactly.
Never works.
It never works.
And now we're going to build more retail.
And the solution is, oh, well, we just need more of what nobody wants. Well, the arts are the 3rd greatest economic driver of the economy for the country. When the Playhouse was there, and I think Max would agree with me on this, there were several restaurants, shops. You stop, you meet a friend, you're taking them to the show for their birthday. You stop, you get them a little gift at a gift shop. You celebrate a dinner after, and it was part of the village, and it kept that area of the Coconut Grove Village vibrant and happening, and it worked all year round. And it had 2 theaters. Past is prologue. It's not rocket science. If we enact a vision that makes sense and that understands that our city is ready for something that elevates a form, we're all gonna float with it.
The sadness is that the county's plan is that don't worry, we have a 300-seat theater diminished from a 1,500-seat theater. Don't worry, because the retail is going to come to the rescue in case the 300 seats aren't enough to sustain, which we know it's not.
Right.
It was the other way around. It used to be the theater was the one propping up the businesses, and that's the model that always worked for the past since 1956.
Absolutely, and considering how many brick and mortar shops are closing,
what are they thinking? It's
like,
totally.
Let's get something that's failing, wrap ourselves and our theatrical jewel to that, and take it down with that.
So tell me this: I'm about to take us. I'm about to ratchet it up. Okay, why is Michael Spring, the cultural arts director for Miami-Dade, continuing to push this plan?
When I think of Michael Spring, I think poor thing, right? Because he has failed in so many projects. South-Dade Arts Complex was supposed to be the wonder of Miami. Nobody goes to South-Dade Art Complex, even though wonderful acts come through there. He's gone wildly over budget on everything he's overseen. Right? I don't know why he insists on developing real estate when he clearly is not good at it. I think what Michael Spring is good at is funding the theater projects or the art cultural projects that speak to him. He's been an ally to the people that he's connected with, but I don't think he has got a vision for the city. And I don't think he believes in the theatrical possibilities of this city. Look, Miami New Drama just won a Drama League Award, oldest theater award in the country. Michelle Hausman understands that he is making theater of Miami for the rest of the country, right? He's a visionary person. he sticks to theater. I think Michael Spring should step away from trying to develop property and stick to funding projects that he thinks are worthy of funding.
So I'm going to get back to that. And Max, I want to talk about what the path forward is. I'm going to ask you the same question. But before I get to that, one of the things that strikes me about this is like the what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And it goes to the idea of I was listening. I'm not that involved in theater. I'm involved in kind of a different form of theater, which is sports. I'm passionate about sports.
Right.
And I remember hearing somebody interviewed and talking about his first job as a head football coach. And he called his mentor, who was Lou Holtz. He'd grown up under the coaching tree of Lou Holtz. And he said, Coach, I got this new job. I can't remember what school it was, but he goes, and I told the coach, I said, I got my first head coaching job. Congratulations. That's fantastic. And he said, yeah, but Coach, it's not a good job. And he said, the Coach Lou Holtz almost jumped through the phone. It's like, there's no such thing as a bad head coaching job. Like, you make the job what it is, make it a good job. And there's a little bit of that aspect here, I think, of is to develop this and to have a vision for the theater. You kind of reminded me of that thing is like, you kind of have to build the theater at the same time you're building. It's like Field of Dreams, right?
Absolutely.
You build it and they will come.
Right.
And there's a little bit of like, and then, we can be naysayers, say, Carmen, I don't believe you. Carmen, it's not going to work. Carmen, it's not going to do this. It's almost like a self-feeding narrative.
Right. Right. And I think what the history shows is that the Playhouse before was absolutely economically.
It worked.
Until a hurricane hit. They had to close for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And Michael Spring refused to give them the aid that they needed to go on.
Yep.
That's a matter of record. And this is where I don't want to think poorly of Michael Spring. I don't want to think that there's malicious intent, but there's a lot of fraudulent things happening. The fact that they never protect the building, the fact that they say something as absurd as a facade.
I'm not sure it's fraudulent. It is. There are things that are happening that show a lack of good faith.
Thank you. That's
20. I'm sorry to interject, but there's $20 million. We voted. I was in the voting booth. I remember the ballot item said, "Do you want to use 20 million?" It was later increased to 25 million. Do you want this to be used to restore a number of places? It included the Coconut Grove Playhouse. I said yes. It said restore the Playhouse. It didn't say demolish it, but up Coco Walk Part 2. So I mean. I'm not going to go. Maybe we should go as far as to say fraud, but
I correct myself on that.
No, I know you didn't say that.
Yeah.
But I have been on the verge of saying that because what else do you call something that money is allocated for one thing and they're not spending a dime of it? And the mayor said it in his veto speech. They're spending $0 of that 20 million that we voted to restore to a shell game where they're giving it to Miami Parking Authority to build all the ancillary and the garage.
So tell me this. On that
it shows a tremendous lack of good faith. The other thing that you said is restoration. When the county sells its plan, it says, "Oh, we're restoring what's important." Thank God the court recognized that the documentation didn't support what they were alleging. But to me, what's interesting is how the county keeps changing their vernacular, because as they see the public says, wait a minute, something's wrong here. We voted for restoration. This is what we're working for. But demolishing 90% of the building does not equal restoration. The county keeps changing its vernacular and changing their marketing on their plan. But it remains the same bad faith plan that it always was. None of us we're spending hours on trying to save this building, and all of us have families and careers and jobs, and we'd rather be doing other things.
That's the important point I wanted us to bring up, is that Michael Spring and the county, they're getting paid to do something. We didn't vote for that. The voters' mandate is to restore it. They're getting paid to do the opposite. We're not getting paid to do what we voted to do.
Yeah.
Right.
But on that note, let me ask you this. It is almost an ingenious plan in two ways. This is one, I know you're saying the building is withstanding it, but there does seem to be a trend in local government in South Florida of demolition by neglect. They don't put anything into it. They put off all the repairs. And then there's also this, I don't know what you'd call it. I don't have a pithy saying for it, but it's this idea of like, we're just going to wear you out. And the
Right.
general public has this attitude of like, oh my God, I am tired of driving by
Yeah.
this building. Like, just do something.
Right. And then they say, well, the people the grassroots people keep stopping us because we have so much power and
We're
money
the bad
behind
guys.
us. We're the bad guys. In 15 years, all they had to do was come up with a plan that respected restoration.
Yeah.
That's all they had to do.
Or do his homework and confer with the state to find out what were the Secretary of the Interior guidelines that are mandatory when you are restoring a historic landmark.
Yes.
He didn't do his homework. He got noted.
Right.
I've got the letter. I mean, look at all the paperwork. Letters from the state of Florida, from the Department of Division of Historic Resources, Tim Parsons.
From
State
commercial and
Right.
nonprofit producers
he got
around the country.
Right.
correct. I've got letters here from the landlord of the property. They own the state. They're leasing it to the county. Michael Spring is the steward of that, telling them you're in violation. 2 letters saying you're in violation of the lease.
Yeah.
No, it's not fraud, but there's something wrong here.
Not only that, Max, when you take all of that into account, there have been several times where our side has wanted to come to the table.
Right.
Said, hey,
Our
you
plan-
want Gable Stage to be in this? We'll ignore the fact that you didn't consult with any other theaters in Miami.
Correct.
Or no other theaters in Miami.
No open bid.
Where there was no open bid for who was going to take over the space. We're going to ignore that. Let's work with you. Let's all come to the table. We have 2 theaters that can be operating 365 days a year, a performance arts center in the city center that's going to drive business, people, art. It's a win-win across the board. And they're saying, no, we want one 300-seat theater. We want one theater company with 4 shows a year to run it. They get the money from the parking, and that's our compromise. And then they've maligned Mike Edson all over the city, who's the man that built Miami City Ballet that gets consistently written up in the New York Times as one of the best ballet companies in the country.
Well, tell me on that note, or go ahead, Max.
In 2015, March of 2015, I remember the day vividly. We were there sitting in the county commission chambers, and they were to vote. The county commissioners were voting on the contracts with Gable Stage and Architectonica. Mike Edson was supposed to be there, and for good reason, he backed out, withdrew his proposal because of some interactions with Michael Spring, who threatened to. And I won't go into that. But they voted on that day for those 2 contracts, and I'm losing my train. There's so many.
Well, we have an
different
opportunity
directions.
for a partnership here.
Right. So
And they've rejected that opportunity for partnership at every turn.
Well, Mike Edson has a track record, and one of the false narratives that Michael Spring has on his Cultural Affairs website, which is voluminous with what he calls facts and updates, is that Mike Edson has no background in theater. So he was CEO, as you said, of the Art Center. So how do we allow people to get away with these? Creating these false narratives, misinforming the public. I think it's one of the reasons why it's dragged out this long, why there's such a delay when there's so much misinformation and confusion.
So that's where I want to go, Max, is Carmen, is what's the path forward? We had an election. We have a new mayor. We have a new commissioner. Nothing has changed.
Well, because I think Daniela Levine Cava, unfortunately, I voted and campaigned for her, and Raquel Regalado have just thrown their hands up in the air, and they're letting Michael Spring go so far as to answer the correspondence that's being sent to them in reference to the Playhouse. In this lawsuit, I'm named as the veto isn't appropriate because I sent an email to my commissioners and to my mayor. I'm a citizen. I pay my taxes in the city. You know, I'm a part of. Why is my voice not important? Daniela Levine Cava should come out and say, yes, her voice is important as much as everybody's voice is important, to pro and against it. And she's not doing that. This is a situation where I really believe that Daniela and Raquel need to come to the table, stop ignoring us, and stop pretending like Michael Spring's got all the answers, when in fact, in 15 years, Michael Spring has only wasted taxpayer money.
It's interesting because it seems I would have thought in my conversations that with Raquel, to a lesser extent with Daniela, but it was done, was like there was a mandate. It's like we want to save, like this is an issue that's passionate to everybody. Let me back up.
That reversal it surprised me as well.
And but then one of the things is like what I find interesting, Carmen, is I was at City Hall yesterday, and a Greenberg Traurig lawyer on the other side, pro-development guy, representing a developer, was like, this is a mess. And, Winker, all your clients are here. They're raising hell. And I was like, this is what democracy looks like. Like, I'm sorry, it's messy.
Right.
And I think there's a little bit of that aspect here. But in the issue I was involved with, there was people on both sides. Like there was a lot of residents that showed up that were in favor of the project.
Sure.
I think one of the things that strikes me here is who are the residents that are in favor of the county plan? Like I'm not seeing them. I don't see people, pushing for the other side of this. And so when I see that, it's hard for me to understand why politicians are not reacting. Does that make sense? Who has Raquel's, Commissioner Regalato's ear that's saying, no. These people don't know what they're talking about. Let's go with Michael Spring.
Well, I think that speaks to what's happening in our city nowadays. I think, unfortunately, our representatives are not listening to us. They're not representing us. They're listening to special interests. And I think there has to be an element of that here. Again, not to cast aspersions or any of that, but otherwise nothing makes sense. Commissioner Regalado was understandably for our plan before she got elected, and all of a sudden she won't meet with us. That doesn't make sense. So,
and it's interesting because I would say, as a lawyer who's involved in the litigation, full disclosure, on the side of preservation of the theater, of the Grove Playhouse, there does seem, it's like the lawsuit is now the excuse not to do anything.
Right.
Like it's just like more of the same. Like it's almost like they're letting it just. No one wants. I guess. Here's what I'd say to you. I don't understand politically. I struggle with this idea of politically. If you come forward with a plan to save the Playhouse, it seems like you'd lock up a huge portion of the Grove. Everyone wants a solution.
Absolutely.
And Commissioner Regalado is not doing that. Mayor Levine Cava is not doing that.
Well, we hope they do. We want to have good faith that there's this veil of silence that's currently taking place as they negotiate, and we want to have faith that they are acting on our behalf. But
right,
we've been down this road before. I won't mention any names, but there was a county commissioner who couldn't have been more on our side, who flipped and went for the demolition plan.
That's what I think, and I agree with you, Max. Because Mayor Levine Cava and Commissioner Regalado just got into office. Let's pretend. Let's give them a little bit of good faith, right? Even though their actions so far have been more than disheartening, let's assume that there are negotiations or things happening that we don't know about. The truth is that we're seeing the pattern here repeat.
Yes.
Instead of a public-private partnership in which Mike Edson has a detailed plan for restoration.
Here it is.
Yeah, a detailed plan. 200-seat theater, running all year round, community, education-based for the community of the community, with a bigger theater running, bringing in bigger shows, a real performing arts hub in the middle of Coconut Grove, all substantiated with numbers and with a plan, an architectural plan that restores the theater. It's done. We could break ground tomorrow. And in 2 years, we could be attending the grand opening.
Why is that falling on deaf ears? I'm a systems-based guy. Like I want to help.
I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist. I don't want to make assumptions, but I don't understand why it's falling on deaf ears either.
Well, you're the lawyer. You know why. There's been litigation for the past 5 years.
Yeah, but I got to tell you something. There's political leadership. There's a solution here, and I am struggling to see. I've asked each of you the path forward, and I'm struggling to see the path forward. It's like no one wants to touch it. But let me back up. No one wants to touch it. So in that vacuum, it seems like cultural arts director Max. I wish Michael Spring gets to do. It's like his private playground.
I think you're naming the problem. He makes it so that no one wants to touch it. When he gave Mike Edson 10 minutes to raise the $10 million he needed, he made sure that everybody that Mike Edson spoke with knew that Mike Edson didn't have the keys to the building. And then nobody wants to be a part of it.
Mike Edson raised $11 million. Michael Spring goes to those donors and then trashes Mike Spring, saying this and that. Excuse me. Those donors to Mike Edson, who gave Mike Edson $11 million. Michael Spring goes to those donors and says, this guy has no track record. He's never run a theater before, even though he was CEO of the Arts Center. So what is the path forward? I think who's the obstacle here? We're blamed as being the obstructionists. Who is the obstructionist? Who's got all the power?
Who's the person that won't come to the table? When Mayor Suarez, before he vetoed it, Mayor Suarez spoke to Mayor Jimenez and said, let's come to the table. Let's figure this out. Let's make it a public-private partnership.
Not only that, the state ordered that take place, that the city and the county work together. The state required it. That's what
the last thing that
they refused to do it.
But I'm gonna the last thing I would kind of leave this with is I struggle with this because just as a lawyer, I remember the first time I got involved with this. I think Andy had called me, or maybe it was you, Max, and the very first conversation as a lawyer, you kind of look at this as like, okay, I was struggling because I thought the Playhouse was privately owned. And it's like, well, no, here's, it's owned by the state. And there's a whole history of the state taking it over. It's like, okay, the state owns it. So the state leases it to who? Well, to Miami-Dade County. Okay. And then you're immediately struck with, and they want to demolish 80% of it.
90% of it.
But here's the thing. So if I rent, we're here at Community Newspapers. So let's say I rent this back room for my law office. And if I go see Michael Miller and I say, Michael Miller and Grant Miller, I'm going to demolish 80% of this back wing. They're going to say, no uncertain terms, like, get the hell out of here. Like, what are you talking about? And so my first reaction was like, okay, has the state signed off on this plan to demolish 80%? Like they're okay with this of a historic resource? And of course, the answer back from the state was,
you want to read? I'll read the whole letter. There's two of them.
Don't read the whole letter, but the response was
you're in violation of the lease. No.
Well, let me back up. They said, no, we don't approve this plan.
Right.
And what's more, you're in violation of the lease. The county is in violation of the lease.
Right.
So I want to get those facts out there because it's like, I struggle with like how, like, I don't understand, like the plan is not going to get approved by the state.
Right.
So why are we wasting time on it? The state has no interest in allowing 80% of a historic asset. They've said it in writing. We don't want this to happen. And two, they're in breach of the lease. From what I hear, FIU's not interested in this stuff anymore anyways. Like, I'm really struggling with like.
Well, the facts, to me, what I find so confounding is that the facts have been on our side for years, right? Parrish stated it was all supposed to be legally landmarked. They fought that until finally they couldn't fight it anymore. Okay. We've pointed out the weird give here to give to there and the money inconsistencies. Mayor Francis proved it. You can't argue it.
And don't skip out. And the electors.
And the electors voted for 20%, or excuse me, for $20 million for restoration. That's a fact. We have a historically preserved building that the city of Miami residents want restored, not demolished. The state has said that the county is in breach of contract. The grassroots organizations want to save the theater. The theatrical community wants to save the theater. Who's standing in the way? And I think it's time that we direct our questions at the county.
Yeah.
I think we all have to write Daniela Levine Cava, ask her on Twitter, ask Commissioner Regalado on Twitter, put public pressure on them to answer the questions that we don't have answers.
And Carmen, here's what I would say to you, but it's even beyond that. There comes a point sometimes I see in my law practice where it's like not doing anything is a decision. And I feel like, the mayor not getting involved, that's a decision. That's a decision in support of what Michael Spring's doing.
Right.
What Commissioner Regalado is doing by doing nothing, that is a decision. in favor of what's happening, which is nothing. Like, I think we've got to, I don't know how we call that out to say, it's not one thing to say like I'm, whatever, we'll let the process play out. But like letting the process play out, you're making a decision about the future, right?
I mean, there's no question about that. I think they're absolutely, they're showing either their incompetence or their cynicism, one or the other. It goes against every fact in the case.
And I'm
They're
not trying to put,
non-action
and listen, I'm not
facts.
trying to put you in this spot because I think that there is still hope, and we've been told that something's going to happen. And it's just, every month that goes by, it's like, wait a minute. And we are in the middle of a pandemic and we're, all this stuff. But I think one of the last thing is like so many pieces of this. I mean, Max, you always bring me back the idea of like the voters voted. Like, isn't there money sitting out there somewhere?
$20 million.
No. But I don't think there's 20. But isn't there like $10 million sitting in an
It
account?
was 20, and then another 5 million was added. And the latest tally I've read on Michael Spring's website is 30. They're working with 30
correct,
million.
Andy. It's correct.
Maybe
Isn't
Andy.
there money? Isn't there a pool of money that gets automatically put in if the restoration plan goes
I
forward?
don't know, Max would know more than
There is a pool of money that goes in. There's also restoration money if it's restored correctly,
One other
according to guidelines we would lose
Yeah.
if the county gets their way.
that's what we need to bring up quickly if we have time, is if they get approved, we miss out on all the tax incentive and all of the benefits from being a historic building. If it's demolished, it gets taken off the National Historic Registry and you lose that money.
So what happens? It gets taken off the National Historic Registry,
They've
and then they pull that. Oops! It's too late.
Yeah.
They've
We
already
should have done it before. It fails as a 300-seat theater because a 300-seat theater is not economically sustainable for the area or for the building. Then what happens?
They've already applied for a grant from the state. We're already denied. This was 3 years ago. So that's the future. They're
They
gonna
can
be-
demolish it again and put up an apartment building.
Like many
a
things,
plaque that says Coconut Grove Playhouse was once here.
like many things we see, a lack of leadership has costs,
Yes.
and we need some leadership on this. We need
competent leadership.
exactly, and it's interesting because we often talk about it's like the same play has been called for 20 years now, almost 20 years. We've got to change what we're doing, and we've got to. Everyone everyone who is hoping to avoid the demolition of this building needs to really focus on what that path forward is.
I think everybody that wants to save this building needs to hold leadership accountable. If you hold these people accountable to their words and their actions, I think a lot's going to come out in the wash, and we're going to be able to make a responsible decision moving.
But tell me
forward.
this. So let me go through this dynamic. Last thing, politically, if I'm correct, Xavier Suarez was vehemently in favor of restoring the Playhouse and opposed to the county plan.
Yes.
Yes.
That was the home commissioner for the Playhouse from Coconut Grove. He was at loggerheads with the Mayor Jimenez. So now what's changed? We have a new home commissioner who says she's in favor, and we have a new mayor. So when you look at that dynamic, like what's changed? The commissioner still is opposed to it. It almost runs into the mayor, right? Because before Xavier Suarez wanted to save it, the mayor stopped it. Well, the mayor's no longer there. Do you see what I'm saying? Like it would seem like the stop in my mind was always Carlos Jimenez. He was always opposed.
Right. And now
Like-
Mayor Levine Cava can take all of this and start from zero.
But so where I'm
bring
going with
everybody
this,
to the table.
maybe it's not Raquel because Xavier was there and he wanted to restore it. He was blocked. Now we have Raquel there who
We have
says,
we have Frederica Wilson. We have on the federal level people now getting involved. We have Frederica Wilson. We have,
The point
Ken Russell, people that are very. So this is nothing that's new. There have been people on all levels, state, local, and federal.
And the problem is Mayor Levine Cava has said, no, it's the commissioner's job to figure it out. It's in her home district. And now Commissioner Regalado
she won't respond.
she won't respond and she was
that's the frustrating
for
thing.
us
We're-
completely. And now she won't respond.
It's interesting because I've had her on the show, and I will say that Commissioner Regalado, then candidate Regalado, was vehement in her support for the restoration.
In an interview, she said this was the top priority for her, the Coconut Grove Playhouse.
Especially coming out of COVID, where people are looking on how to convene, how to rebuild. There are so many issues that we face as a city. We face rising waters, horrible inequality. We face an affordable housing crisis like we've never seen before, and it only seems to get worse. Now, it's really a moment where putting an economic engine in the center of Coconut Grove that has been proven to work is more essential than ever. Recognizing that it's a win-win historically, culturally, and economically is a no-brainer.
I have to end this show on that because, I mean, just say that again. Economically,
Historically, and culturally,
it's the right choice.
Restoring the Playhouse to a performing arts hub in the center of the city that's going to operate 365 days a year, that's going to be home to several theater companies, not just one, several dance companies, music companies that can perform in both houses, a conservatory, an education center, a place that brings in the West Grove, who was purposely left out before, fixing the horrible mistakes of the past while creating a culturally relevant historical theater in Miami that's going to economically be gangbusters for everybody. As a public-private partnership, where is the loss?
I'm going to close it on that. Commissioner Regalado, we need help. We need Mayor Levine Cava. We need help. We need to move this project forward. This needs to get done. And it's interesting because personally, I'm not really an arts guy. But to me, when I think of our tourism base and I think about, what we are as a place and what Miami's becoming, to me, it's an economic driver. I've always said that, just to me, it's like, if you don't give a crap about the Playhouse, just from the economics of driving people into the Grove, it just makes perfect sense.
The thing that makes the biggest difference between animals and human beings are that we make art.
Mm-hmm. You're taking it to another level, but
no. Art fuels everything. Art is our history. We have an opportunity right now to tell the rest of the country we care about arts and culture and history, or we are the superficial, glitzy, everybody makes a joke about Miami being. We create the city that we want to live in, and we have to make sure that our representatives answer to us and are fiscally, culturally, and historically competent and responsible.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you for listening. And we got a call to action today. So let's get to work.
Were there no questions?